This is Life Lessons Lounge, and I'm Igina Gerazi. Here, we explore diverse life stories and the wisdom they hold. Let's delve into the stories that shape us, teach us, and connect us all. Welcome, my dear. I'm so happy you're here. And I'm
Great to
so
be here.
happy that everybody gets to know you.
Thank you for the invitation.
Good.
It's wonderful to be here.
Good. I'm happy. So, who's Martina? That's the first question.
I'm Bulgarian by birth and roots, a Londoner by nurture and expression,
Beautiful.
and a Lisbonite through transformation.
Wow.
And I'm someone who loves to create. And recently, especially this year, I've been creating a lot of connections and new friendships and new networks and new channels of meaning. And I've been loving that.
That's beautiful.
Thank you.
And you also have a special interest for astrology.
I do. I have several special interests. And as a multi-passionate person, astrology became one of these interests that I also turned into my work. It showed me where the work of me exists. And it also became something that I love sharing with others and using it as a tool for guidance. For me, it was a tool I used to validate parts of me that in many ways were always sitting at odds in my mind. It's an interest I've had since I was a child through stories, myths, and legends. I love being read to. I love stories. I love adventure.
That's nice.
And it appeared in my life from a very early age through those Greek myths and stories as I was growing up in Bulgaria as a child. And then when I moved to London and became a teenager, I got interested into the characteristics of each of the zodiacs. And so I would know all the positives and negatives, so to speak, of each sign. And then it's actually really common in Bulgaria to visit astrologers.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Because in Albania, it's more
also
the coffee cup.
Okay.
Kind of fortune tellers.
We are, I think, that part
Astrologers
of the
not as
world.
much.
Yes, it's really welcoming and open to practices like this. The part of the world we're in now and further west, perhaps these practices are deemed as woo, whereas in many other cultures, they are part of a wisdom tradition, which is really far from the way we use the word woo now. And my practice is really, my intention is for it to be grounded in practical spirituality. It's also who I am. My spirituality is varied, but there is a practical element to it as well. And so coming back to the coffee cup versus the fortune telling versus the stars and the cosmos and all of that connectedness, I received my first astrology reading when I was 19, and it was fascinating.
Okay.
And the astrologer shared something with me that has remained with me to this day. And it wasn't pleasant to hear. And so she shared the possibility of an experience that has yet to happen. And I almost feel I've led my life with that quote unquote warning at the back of my mind. And shall I tell you what she said?
Yes. Oh, I'm very curious. Yes.
So she said, you end up having two marriages. There hasn't been husband one, and there certainly hasn't been husband two yet.
Okay.
Now, at 19,
Yeah.
I received that as information, but in my mid-20s, in my late 20s, in my early 30s, I kind of began realizing that I had created a relationship around that sentence and that piece of information. And that piece of information was no longer information. It was now a narrative that I was living with.
It's like a prophecy.
Totally.
Oh.
And each relationship I entered that was really meaningful, I thought, oh, is that husband one or is that husband two?
Oh, my.
And so I had astrology readings further into my 20s. And as I said, culturally, it's something that's really available to us in Bulgaria. And so when I was going on holiday back and forth, it was this guidance that I was seeking from a place of not realizing that I also hold this guidance within me. And perhaps from a place of, oh, I want a bit of fortune telling, and oh, I wonder what the universe has in store for me. And also, do I really trust myself to make decisions from a place of self-power? Or will I readily give my power away to something? So kind of didn't do anything astrologically related for a very long time. Slight tangent, had a previous life in my 20s in sales and retail management. And I was really lucky to work for some really cool companies in London. And I would always give 120% and more where available in the name of other people's visions and dreams and goals and wishes and desires in that kind of professional capacity. And then towards my late 20s and early 30s, I had a nervous breakdown, aka Saturn return. And so that experience led to different parts of my life really breaking down completely. Section by section, category by category, call it whatever you like, my personal life, my work life, my health, all of my relationships, all of it was just like this domino effect of the foundations your life is built upon are not safe, they're not grounded, and we're going to do something about that. We being the universe or a higher power. And I was in that place for a really long time. And two practices, the main practice that was already in my life, that arrived in my life around the age of 19 as well, was yoga. So my yoga practice was my grounding, was my solace, was my escape. I was escaping in other ways as well, but that was the practice that allowed me to reconnect to myself and to kind of keep moving forward. And at some point, I took some time away from work and took a long break because I needed to re-engage with myself. I needed to re-engage with life. I really didn't like people at that time. And I found work with children, which was, and that was the second thing that was my savior. Taught me patience. It taught me so much patience. And I've always loved having children around. I am an auntie of many of my friends have children. Some of them are now grown. And some of them are also very young additions to the extended family. And I celebrate all of that. And both my parents have also worked with children at some point in their lives. And I never saw myself as someone who will work with children. I didn't want to make something I love so much my work for fear of not wanting to do it anymore. However, finding work with children allowed me to rebuild parts of me that had been forgotten and lost and given away and so on and so forth. And so this was in the wellness space. And so I took that work with children, and at one point retrained to be a family yoga teacher. And I was already traveling, which was one of the healthier ways of escaping and rebuilding that connection to myself. And it was at the beginning a way, definitely, of escaping, until it turned into trips with a mission, trips with purpose, travel with purpose. And so many of my latter trips were to do with either trainings or explorations of different types, or scouting trips. And somehow, I started coming to Portugal.
There are no coincidences.
There are no coincidences. And my first trip to Portugal was actually in 2015. So 9 years ago. That 9-year number is important in the celestial cycles as well.
Yeah.
It's half a cycle. That is very significant to that path and purpose that we are given and that we get to co-create with. My first trip to Portugal was interesting, to say the least.
Tell me more.
Not the most exciting.
Oh.
It was very much, here's a hot country, let's go and see it. The following trips to Portugal were a lot more interesting because they were connected to either retreats or trainings. And in those trips, I actually had a yoga teacher in London who is Portuguese, and she shared, I really connected with her teachings. And very soon after I started practicing with her, she shared that she was moving to Portugal to get married. I thought, oh no, I've just found a great teacher. And she was hosting a retreat, so I followed her. That retreat she hosted, it was 2016, was one of the first catalysts towards change and renewal, and a further breakdown towards that so-called breakthrough. 6 months later, I followed her again to another location in Portugal for a second retreat, which was also very profound in terms of the emotional shifts I needed to experience. And on that trip, I met somebody who 4 years later became my first landlord in Portugal. Lots of stories in between to tell, but the synchronicity of how one thing led to another is present in my life every day. And I just have to say yes to it.
Yeah.
I just have to say, show me what's next.
Amazing.
And it happens.
But that willingness and that awareness, actually, of saying yes and being fully present, not attached, just go in it. I think that's amazing that you can do that.
It is, and I'm still working on the non-attached part.
Okay.
I'm all
That's
about
hard for everyone. That's hard for everyone.
That has been the most challenging part, and I recognize a very rewarding one, because another tangent, as we consider the idea of not being attached to something or someone, an idea, an experience, a relationship, whatever. I mean, one of the books I looked at in your library, gorgeous library earlier, is one called Presence. And another tangent, and I'm going to come back to it, I promise. Multi-passionate, multitasker.
Good.
Let's see how that goes. Right now, the most current thing is learning how to be present with vulnerability, and learning that vulnerability only takes place in actual presence with another. Okay, we'll park that tangent.
And in trust.
That's done. And in trust. And to that detachment, words we associate are letting go, surrender. And another one I've come to really embrace since moving to Portugal is acceptance. And I think it's really becoming, and I hope it will continue to become part of my work, acceptance and devotion.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, these words also sit on the axis of Pisces and Virgo. Coming back to that first tangent, as synchronicities appeared and as I kept saying yes to them, eventually through intention and co-creation with astrology, I decided to move to Portugal and have work with children in the wellness space. Astrology was not in my awareness in terms of something that I wanted to share with others. It was a self-orienting practice. It was a practice it started with cycles of the moon, really intentionally. It started with ritualizing my routines around the moon, and I use these words in client work as well. And it allowed me to express my creativity. It allowed me to express some of my flair for words and language. It allowed me to use my intuition. It invited me to be present with people and really see people in ways that maybe in hindsight I was hoping to be seen and received. And so for me, it's a whole practice. Not to say it's the only practice, but it was a whole practice. And that was my that's the relationship I cultivate with it. And it also shows us where each person's practice, each person's gift, each person's challenge, each person's lessons, contribution, purpose, potential lies. And it can all be so different. But that is a practice I chose for that purpose for me, and they actually chose me. And every other aspect of what I've done and how I've gotten to it and the other practices I share as a holistic practitioner are all relevant to that. And it was in astrology that I consolidated myself. I'm a Pisces sun with a Virgo rising, and I have a Cancer moon. And
what does it mean?
I'm about to tell you.
Okay.
In presenting, if I can put that in one sentence, in either presenting to others in workshops or events with an astrology focus, of course, it means I was made for others.
To serve others, or to
Possibly, yes. That is one way that I interpret it.
Oh.
I was made for others because of where these energies are in my chart, in my life areas. It's life areas associated with other people.
Mm.
And so my connection to other people is as important as my connection to myself. And astrology also showed me that nothing exists in isolation, that everything exists in relation to something else. Yoga shows that too. But as we're talking about astrology, eventually I reconciled that, coming back to the beginning, somehow we got back to the beginning, reconciled that narrative around you have two husbands.
Yes.
Because I saw what else it could mean.
Mm-hmm.
Just as nothing sits in isolation, it is a wisdom science, and it's a language open to interpretation. It has so much symbology. It has so many layers of meaning that each person, each practitioner can bring to the practice, and it's constantly evolving. As traditional and as old as it is constantly evolving. And so I learned that two husbands can also mean
two projects, or
two parallel projects, two parallel careers, two parallel interests of significance and importance.
But you see what she said, how much it has influenced you, no?
And then I chose to not be that type of astrologer.
Good.
And then I chose to, of course, I have had other teachers and ways of working with the practice to learn from different experiences of others, where I got to choose what kind of a practitioner would I like to be. Do I want to tell people not to leave their house for 3 weeks because something is about to take place that might not be as beneficial or pleasant to their life? Or do I want to give people agency and authority to make choices and co-create with this practice, which is why I call it the art of co-creation. And this is a word that I've borrowed from another famous astrologer whose books have been really inspiring to me. And she really emphasizes the co-creation aspect of it. And so the initial astrology reading I had, I took that to be my experience for a really long time. I was attached to it. Pisces is all about attachment. And when I started going deeper and deeper into why was I these two seemingly opposite things, Virgo and Pisces, the thing that does really bring them together is this idea of service. And so service as a word for me is it's really close to my heart. And the practice has shown me where I'm also not serving myself. And that willingness to serve others, to offer guidance, validation, comfort, whatever someone is seeking, I also have to do that for myself. And ultimately, in that experience, coming back to that giving your power away point from the beginning, I am keeping the power within me.
That's good.
And then from there, I get to share an interpretation of an experience of another as I see it, but also invite the person to share their experience of that energy, which is the thing I love about the practice, because there isn't a finality to it in terms of this can only mean that. And so each person's another Pisces Virgo person. I have several friends with Pisces Virgo Cancer, very strong in their chart, and we're all very different. And we can recognize where some of these tendencies come up and where they serve us. And that word service and that word serving has also become really present in the wellness space, in the personal development space, in that whole space that we are part in, where we want to be letting go of things that no longer serve us. Sometimes we are being let go of, and we forget that. And sometimes that can also be uncomfortable. And now I've gone off on so many tangents. I've lost it. Let's come back. Bring me back to something.
So you mentioned
what was the
service.
question? This happens in real life. So I appreciate the patience.
So service, devotion, acceptance.
Service, devotion, acceptance.
Those are the three words that actually what I took from the astrological journey or you right now. So would you say that's your purpose in life? Or
I would say so. I would say so. And as you said those three words, service, devotion, and acceptance, I would put acceptance right in the middle as the bridge between service and devotion. And again, that is that Pisces Virgo axis of service and devotion.
Yeah.
And I consider myself a devotee, and I consider myself in service of another, something bigger than me, myself, which is the one I'm really struggling with. And acceptance is where I get to turn and turn to either side and then bring it back to the middle. And I used to think that love was the most amazing experience. kind of changed my mind. Then I thought, of course I still do, but I added another layer. And then I thought, no, it's understanding. Understanding is bigger than love. Then I had people who presented a different perspective to me, and eventually came to the realization that it's actually acceptance. And acceptance can be letting go, it can be surrender, it can be being with what is present right now without wanting to alter it or change it.
It can be trusting. Yeah.
It can be trust, and it's allowing for something to be as it needs to be, and then discernment can come from that, which is also a really good Virgo word. If acceptance is a word associated with Pisces, then as someone with a Pisces sun, that is ultimately what I am working towards. The sun is one of those significators of our purpose as well. And it's an energy that we get to cultivate and really tap into more and more as we move through the cycles of life. And I would like that to be part of my life's work, acceptance. And it's not always easy.
Yeah, I bet. So for someone who doesn't speak much astrological language,
Okay.
I love that you mentioned, Pisces, Sun, Moon, all of it. Great. I'm curious about, because I know that there are many of this astrological, like the Vedic, Chinese to traditional. So which one do you actually follow?
So I practice the modern astrology.
Okay, what's that?
Using the tropical zodiac. And I use Vedic techniques and I use traditional techniques. I haven't studied Chinese astrology. I know what my sign is, and that's it. I'm an ox. Modern astrology is also many layered. And for me, it allows me to be current and welcome new ways of seeing, whilst also incorporating techniques from more traditional and rooted and really established practices. But it includes the modern planets. It includes the 3 modern planets that we just discovered. Pluto, Neptune, and Uranus. At one point, we could only see the sky up to Saturn. And of late, Saturn is becoming something that I would also like to work with further and further and further, because it's deemed as a planet of restriction. It's deemed as a planet of boundaries. It is embodying all of these symbolisms, and it is our toughest teacher. Saturn in our charts is where we really get to step into authority. And Saturn initially was that boundary before we discovered the 3 modern planets, which we also associate as higher octaves of some of the other planets. And so they're an extension of the energy, if you like. And of course, they have their own traits and meanings based on the times when they were discovered. But if we just stay with Saturn for a moment, Saturn deals with cycles of maturity. And it really invites us to look at how much are we adulting life? How much are we present for the full experience? Because the full experience is both pleasant and unpleasant. It's both joyful and not so joyful. And it's also an energy that gives us rewards and achievements and gifts only through challenge. Bless you. Let that be confirmation.
Yes.
And so it gives us these rewards only through challenge. Now, I have an aspect in my chart that connects to my Saturn energy. And also, I should say, my Saturn energy connects to another aspect in my chart that more and more I am intending to devote my astrology work to. And that's my Chiron placement.
Chiron.
And
who's Chiron now?
We, in astrology, in the day-to-day narrative, because now astrology has really re-entered the mainstream. And I say re-entered because it was once upon a time. Then it had a little bit of a break, and now it's coming back. Chiron is known as the wounded healer.
Okay.
And he's a centaur and an asteroid. And when he was discovered, he was also discovered in modern day. He was discovered in the 70s. And he was very quickly named Chiron. And sometimes asteroids take a while to find their name and meaning. And it was very clear in terms of what he was going to be known as. In myth, Chiron was born to a god and a nymph. And so he's a little bit of he's a mixture of these two energies. He's a demigod. So he's not immortal. What I discovered and what we as an astrology community discovered is that Chiron shows us, yes, our wounds, the suffering that we have willingly signed up for to experience over and over again, to then take that suffering and turn it into a gift, turn it into a talent. It is a talent. And why I also began the story with Saturn is because to experience those talents and to work with that suffering in order to serve, help others, which is part of that energy, it ultimately shows us how we can heal others, because it is an energy of the healer, even though we might not be able to heal ourselves, because that's what happened to him. He was injured and he couldn't die because he was a demigod. And at one point, I'm clearly butchering the myth, but at one point he changed his place with Prometheus in order to die, because his suffering was so intense and he was able to heal others. He was able to, he was a student and a teacher of healing, and he was never able to fully heal himself. And so Chiron in my chart is right at the top of the most visible point in my chart. They're together. And it's also supported by two other energies at the very bottom of my chart that give it that extra visibility, that almost turn it into a platform. What I had to accept, not that I was resisting it, but maybe on some level I was, but something I ended up accepting and embracing is that Chiron is going to be my life's work, because in many ways it's who I am, and I keep choosing that experience. At one point I may stop choosing suffering and I may start choosing another experience that was informed by the suffering. We all have to experience the woundedness of Chiron in order to take that and then help others. And that help is colored and filtered through the sign and the house placement and what is speaking to it, all of these aspects. Chiron in my chart is also looked after by the same energy that looks after my ascendant, and it's the dispositor of my Chiron. It's Mercury, which is why I like words so much, and also other reasons. And it's so potent for me to dive into that energy and to dive into that experience, because then I really get to help others. and I love helping others. I'm a former people pleaser, and I had to reconcile with that also, because I'm water and fire, and the two don't immediately speak to each other in the way that they can understand each other. And parts of me are very willing to give up parts of me. Other parts are very bold and courageous, and they're confident. And over the years, I've played a dance because of different experiences, because of the nervous breakdown I experienced, because I allowed other energies to take from me. And not only that, I then willingly gave up parts of me. I had to do a bit of recollecting. I had to do a bit of, oh, what's there? Let me claim that back. Oh, what's over there? Let me claim that back. And again, coming back to this, the practice of astrology, it showed me it put things into perspective. It put things into a lot of perspective. And it asked me a question of, this is potential. This is a promise. This is a blueprint. Do you want to work with this? And by work, I don't just mean professionally. I'm using that word in all of its meanings. Do you want to work with this? And if you do, you also get to help others. And if you don't, that's also okay. You get to do something else, maybe not as fun. And so I keep signing up for suffering. I keep signing up for more and more suffering, consciously and unconsciously, to a point where acceptance as this bigger umbrella of an experience is now really turning into authority. My word for this year was authority, because I knew certain area in my life, certain area in my chart was going to get activated, and I wanted to work with that energy, because ultimately that's what astrology does for me. It allows you to know something maybe ahead of time. And yes, there is a little bit of fortune telling if that's how you choose to create with these energies. And it allows you to understand that things move in cycles. And right now, if you focus on this instead of that, it could potentially take you to an experience that you're seeking. And if you turn your attention away from this and instead focus on that, it's not time for that. Let that be for a minute and focus on this. Work with the cosmos. Be in connection with what is available to you. Receive, which is also another big word that I'm learning, that I also use in my work. I invite people to receive, and I often find myself unable to receive. So Chiron is something I intentionally am working with in my practice, in my readings, in my life, in my work, in my creativity. During the last 4 years, my creativity started expressing itself in the form of oracle decks. And so I created a poetry oracle deck, as I also write poetry.
Yes, you do.
And that's called Channeled Lines and Rhymes.
Nice.
And then I created another 4 decks, one of which is called the Chiron deck. And I haven't published it yet because of that very obstacle that I am. I need to write a book. I haven't yet written a book to go with the deck. I am going to self-publish, or do I go through an application process and connection process and networking process and, building an audience process to get it in front of a publishing house? Who am I to publish this thing?
Yeah, all those thoughts have come up.
All those thoughts,
sure.
literally on the same day, on most days. And it's like, okay, as you said earlier, I hear you. Please take a seat. And that is something that I'm intending to be both a tool for people that they can use in their own rituals and routines, but also a teaching deck. because Chiron is that student teacher, and I have other symbolisms in my chart that speak to that energy of the student teacher, that I will eternally be a student teacher.
Same.
Absolutely, as we during the pause discovered. And the acceptance in that piece comes from, do you want this? Do you want this? It's available to you. Say yes. And earlier you mentioned that I've been saying yes to signs and synchronicities, and we're co-creating on a daily basis. And there is this big invitation to step into more visibility because of Chiron, because of where it is for me, and because of my own journey. Even being here with you is part of that, where...
Well done.
Thank you. I procrastinated the opportunity for us to do this together for 2.5 months until I was ready to get over myself.
Good.
So I began the year with the theme of authority, and we are more than halfway through.
How's it going?
Interesting. It's been an interesting cycle. And where I'm at now is 2 things: commitment to myself, and perhaps commitment to my visibility, and an invitation to get over myself.
Well, you have ticked them here.
With a pencil. By the end of the year, I might turn those ticks. But definitely on the way there, because visibility for me is interesting. I actually like it. And a threat. Because it opens me up to judgment.
Yes.
Which I have in me. And part of the things I've had to accept are also these elements of, where can I turn my judgment into discernment? Where can I use the opposite of the energy? It's the same anyway. It's just a way of it expressing. And what is my judgment trying to show me in the moment where I do judge? And can I be discerning? Can I also bring in a bit more compassion? And can I be in a position of visibility, because I really, really love what I do and I love sharing it with others? And can I also go back to that time 9 years ago where this has chosen me to work with it, and I am choosing it to work with also, and we need strong foundations in order to do that. And so that's where I'm at.
Good. So what would you advise people that would love to go for astrology reading? How do they discern a good astrologer?
Talk to the person, and if you can talk to the person, because it is a practice that has become really, really popular. And so there are many astrologers with which you won't be able to have a conversation to start with. And really, you're going to have to go on a recommendation, or because someone has an amazing following and everybody loves them. And if you are able to have some kind of interaction with a person, because you're really going to allow a person into the deepest depths of you. I joke with people. I literally ask people for their birth details on like the second hour we meet. Of course, using discernment if we've overstepped that kind of boundary, and it's okay. But most of the time I do, and most of the time I get it. And I share that with people, that you have just given me the password to your life. This is the most important thing, in my opinion, that you can share with another. And that's a big responsibility on the person receiving that information. So there is trust there. There is trust, and there is also, I believe there needs to be an ease it needs to feel safe and easy to have someone look at you and hold that space for both your shadows and your lights, because nothing exists in isolation, as we said earlier. And if a conversation is not available, then absolutely a personal recommendation is always great. Ask questions. I love a good question. If you can, ask questions, and ask questions that allow you to feel more into the person, not what does this mean in my third house, right? Those are the questions to ask for during the reading. Feel the answer. Feel the answer. It's a practice that adds to you. It's not something that takes away from you. There are ways of consulting which are a little bit doom and gloom, and I don't subscribe to those, because it will ultimately impact our whole experience if we allow it, where we end up living in fear. Do we want to live in fear?
No.
My landlady says that she wants more champagne in life.
Yes.
So let's go for that instead.
Let's do that.
Responsibly.
Good, Martina. Is there anything else that you would like to add here that we haven't covered?
No, there isn't.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being visible.
Thank you for inviting me.
And also for sharing all your wisdom and your knowledge and your insights. It's a vast world that I think I maybe understood 20%.
Dip a toe in it. And it is, as soon as I began getting further and further into my studies of astrology, very quickly you realize that this is a lifelong study. This is a lifelong relationship. And I am committed to cultivate that lifelong relationship. That is my intention. So thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with us in the Life Lessons Lounge. Remember, every story has its wisdom. Join us next time for more insights and inspiration. Until then, keep learning, keep growing, and keep sharing your own story.